Hi everybody! Today I'd like to introduce to you the contents of the non-mandatory Central Provident Fund system. The purpose of implementing non-mandatory Central Provident Fund system is to provide further protection for the Macau residents in their old age, and the Social Security Fund is the government department that implements the system. Let me introduce the contents of the system to you one by one. 1. Individual account owners. The Social Security Fund opens automatically an individual account of the non-mandatory Central Provident Fund system for any Macau resident who has attained 18 years of age or who is under age 18 but has already enrolled in the Social Security system. 2. Source of funds. There are two types of funds under the non-mandatory Central Provident Fund system, namely the funds allocated by the government and the contributions. Type 1. The funds allocated by the government include the incentive basic funds in the amount of 10,000 patakas and the special allocation from budget surplus made when it is allowed by the annual budget of the SAR government. The Social Security Fund is responsible for allocating the funds to the non-mandatory Central Provident Fund individual accounts of eligible residents, and the funds are managed based on the principles of prudence and low risk. Type 2. Contributions form the core of the non-mandatory Central Provident Fund system, and they are managed by qualified fund management entities. Contributions include those paid jointly by employee and employer, and those paid individually by residents. 3. Composition of an individual account. An individual account of the non-mandatory Central Provident Fund system is composed of three types of sub-accounts. Type 1. The government-managed sub-account is managed by the Social Security Fund, used mainly for recording and managing the funds allocated by the government and the balance transferred from other sub-accounts. Type 2. The contribution sub-account is managed by the fund management entity, used mainly for recording and managing the contributions under the contribution scheme. Type 3. The preserved sub-account is managed by the fund management entity, used mainly for recording and managing the balance transferred from a contribution sub-account due to termination of a labor relationship. 4. Portability of individual accounts. The individual account has a portability feature. In example, the employee's contributions towards the contribution scheme are not required to be withdrawn immediately due to termination of a labor relationship, but on leaving employment, the employee may choose to process the balance in his or her contribution sub-account using one of the four ways. Method 1. Keep the balance in the preserved sub-account opened by the original fund management entity for further accumulation. If the employee does not specify the processing method of funds, this will be the default method. Method 2. Transfer the funds to government-managed sub-account. Method 3. If there are other contribution sub-accounts, transfer the funds to any one of them. Method 4. Transfer the funds to other preserved sub-accounts opened under the non-mandatory Central Provident Fund system for integration. The sub-accounts are interoperable. Individual account owners can apply to transfer the funds between sub-accounts, but the funds can be transferred out of a contribution sub-account only when the employee leaves employment. Under normal circumstances, an account owner must be at least 65 years of age to withdraw funds from the sub-account. In order to avoid individual account owners having trouble managing too many preserved sub-accounts, the system stipulates that each account owner can only have one preserved sub-account with each fund management entity. In order to protect the rights of individual account owners, the balance in the individual account can neither be seized nor transferred, but does not affect the transfer of funds between sub-accounts, the employer's withdrawal of contribution benefits, the return of public funds according to law, the fees charged by fund management entities for managing the pension funds, or treating the balance in the individual account as an inheritance. 5. Contribution schemes of Provident Fund. There are two types of contribution schemes under the non-mandatory Central Provident Fund system, namely the Joint Provident Fund Scheme and the Individual Provident Fund Scheme. Among them, the Joint Provident Fund Scheme is voluntarily set up by employer and voluntarily participated by employees, whereas the Individual Provident Fund Scheme is voluntarily set up and participated by individual account owners. The Joint Provident Fund Scheme is applicable to employees who have a labor relationship with the business. With the consent of the employee to participate in the scheme, the employer and employee use the employee's monthly basic wage as the basis for calculating the amount amount of contributions, and each of them pays contributions at 5% of the basic wage. The system also allows employer and employee to add other payments such as overtime allowance and bonus to the employee's basic wage as the basis for calculating the amount of contributions. In addition, if either the employer or the employee wishes to contribute more than 5%, he or she may do so by informing the fund management entity. Taking into account the affordability of both employers and employees, the system introduces a mechanism that automatically links the minimum wage for cleaning and security employees in the property management services to the upper and lower limits of the calculation base of contributions. In terms of the lower limit, the employee is not required to make contributions if his or her basic wage for the month is less than 6,569 patakas, and yet the employer is still required to pay contributions. As for the upper limit, if the employee's basic wage for the month is higher than 31,200 patakas, both the employer and employee are not required to make contributions for the excess amount. Under the premise that the system aims to provide better retirement protection for employees, the upper or lower limit that I've just mentioned can also be adjusted. Let's look at the following example. Assuming that the basic wage of employees A is 6,500 patakas per month and employee B is 40,000 patakas, both the employer and employee contribute 5% of the basic wage. Since the basic wage of employee A is less than 6,569 patakas, he is exempt from paying contributions, but his employer is still required to make contributions for him in the amount of 325 patakas. On the other hand, since the basic wage of employee B is higher than 31,200 patakas, she and her employer are required to contribute only 5% of 31,200 patakas. In example, each of them will contribute 1,560 patakas. Although employee A qualifies for an exemption from the payment of contributions, he may also choose to make contributions. In order to increase the amount of monthly contributions, employee B and her employer may also calculate the contributions based on employee B's total basic wage. As for the individual Provident Fund scheme, the minimum amount of contribution is 500 patakas per month, and the amount of contributions can be increased based on the account owner's personal preference. But the increase must be in unit of 100 patakas and also subject to a ceiling of 3,100 patakas. In addition, employees who have already participated in the Joint Provident Fund scheme can also participate in the Individual Provident Fund scheme. 6. The right to choose the fund management entities and pension funds. The fund management entity may apply to register the open pension funds, whose establishment has been approved by the Monetary Authority of Macau as the investment instruments of the non-mandatory Central Provident Fund system. Under the Joint Provident Fund scheme, the fund management entity is chosen by the employer, and the employer and employee may respectively pick a suitable pension fund for their own contributions by percentage. If the period of time when both employer and employee are paying contributions fulfills the requirement for the employee to obtain all of the employer's contribution benefits, the employee can also determine the funds that are to be invested and the allocation ratio of the employer's contributions. As for the Individual Provident Fund scheme, individuals will have complete discretion. 7. Standard vesting percentage. Under the Joint Provident Fund scheme, the part of the employer's contributions that can be obtained by the employee is calculated using the vesting percentage. The vesting percentage is a percentage of employer's contributions obtained by the employee at termination of a labor relationship and is determined by the period of time when both employer and employee are paying contributions. The employee will start to receive 30% of the employer's contributions after making 3 years of contributions, and then the percentage will increase by 10% every year until it will reach 100% when the employee has already made 10 years of contributions. The system also allows employers to set more favorable terms for the employees than the standard vesting scale. For example, the employee can obtain part of the employer's contributions for only 1 year of contributions, or obtain all of the employer's contributions for less than 10 years of contributions. 8. Interface between the private pension fund and the non-mandatory central provident fund system. The decision to interface the private pension plan with the non-mandatory central provident fund system lies with the employer. The method implemented by the interface of employees is new system for new employees and old system for old employees. Old employees refer to the serving employees who have already joined the private pension plan of the business before the employer participates in the non-mandatory central provident fund system. They can choose whether to interface the private pension plan with the non-mandatory central provident fund system. New employees refer to the employees who have not joined any private pension plan of the business at the time of interface, or they are hired by the business only after the employer participates in the non-mandatory central provident fund system. They can only choose whether to participate in the non-mandatory central provident fund system. For old employees who choose to interface, the following will occur. The private pension plan and the joint provident fund scheme will take effect at the same time. The employer will terminate the payment of contributions to the private pension plan of the old employee, and new contributions will only be paid towards the joint provident fund scheme. Regarding the terms of the private pension plan, the terms that are more favorable for the employees than the joint provident fund scheme must be retained. For example, if the contribution rate is higher than 5%. The contribution time under the private pension plan and the joint provident fund scheme must be combined together. For example, if an employee chooses to interface his private pension plan with the non-mandatory central provident fund system after making contributions towards the private pension plan for 5 years, and then he leaves employment after making 2 more years of contributions. Assuming that the method of calculating the vesting of benefits for the private pension plan and the joint provident fund scheme is consistent, since the employee has 7 years of contributions in total, the employee can obtain 70% of the employer's contributions under the private pension plan and the joint contribution scheme, respectively. The balance in the private pension plan will be processed according to the terms of the original plan. For example, employees can withdraw funds at termination of a labor relationship, but the balance in the joint provident fund scheme must be withdrawn according to the provisions of the non-mandatory central provident fund system. In example, under normal circumstances, the funds can be withdrawn only when one has attained the age of 65. Old employees may apply to transfer the benefits to the non-mandatory central provident fund system when they meet the requirement for the withdrawal of funds under the private pension plan. In example, leaving employment. For old employees who have not chosen to interface, the employer and employee must continue to make contributions towards the private pension plan. Employees, whether old or new, if they have not participated in the non-mandatory central provident fund system at the time of interface or the start of employment, they may still participate in the scheme at any time in the future. 9. Withdrawal of funds. Under normal circumstances, an account holder who has attained 65 years of age may apply to withdraw all or part of the funds of the non-mandatory central provident fund system. Individual account owners can also apply to withdraw all or part of the funds if he or she is under age 65. But there is a need to meet huge medical expenses due to serious injury or illness of his or her own, or if he or she has attained age 60 and is not engaged in any paid activities, or if he or she has humanitarian reasons. It is important to note that if you have already applied to withdraw funds, using the reason of attaining 60 years of age and not engaging in any paid work, you cannot withdraw funds for the same reason again. For individual account owners under age 65, the maximum amount that they can withdraw will be the cumulative amount of funds allocated by the government over the years. The reasons for such withdrawals include a need to bear huge medical expenses due to serious injury or illness of his or her spouse, any degree of lineal consanguinity or affinity, or he or she has been receiving disability pension from the Social Security Fund for more than 1 year, or he or she is currently receiving special disability subsidy from the Social Welfare Bureau. It is important to note that regardless of the reason for the withdrawal of funds, the applicant can withdraw the funds only once a year. In the case where a labor relationship has not been terminated, the amount that the employee can withdraw includes only the part of his or her own contributions in the contribution sub-account in the funds in the government-managed sub-account and preserved sub-account. 10. Tax incentives. In order to determine the assessable profits of the employer in respect of the profits tax and Group 2 of salaries tax, the contributions paid by the employer towards the Joint Provident Fund scheme can be considered as the operating costs of the burdens of engaging in business, which can be deducted from the taxable profits, in order to encourage more employers to participate in the system as early as possible. Employers can enjoy an additional 2 times of temporary tax concessions in the first 3 years of the system implementation. You may learn more about the non-mandatory Central Provident Fund system through our website or promotional materials, or call 2853-2850 during office hours for inquiries.